All right. Well, I am super excited today to chat with Melissa and Karen from Intentional Therapist. Welcome to the show, Melissa and Karen.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you both on, and a lot of the times I speak with just one person, so it's fun to speak with two. And it's we're just hanging out, we're having coffee, and
Mhm.
excited about what you have to share. I've spent some time on your website and love what you're doing. Love the resources that you have. But before we get into all of that, why don't you let people know a little bit more about yourselves, who you are, what you do, and how you maybe share a little bit of your background of how you got started doing what you're doing now.
Sure, I guess I can start. So I'm Karen Dyck. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work in private practice just outside Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And Melissa and I actually started Intentional Therapist a few years ago. Her and I had an opportunity to work together in a rural setting, in a public mental health setting. And yeah, at one point we just started talking about different ways to use our uh, expertise and just started talking about how difficult it is for so many female mental health clinicians to really take care of themselves. We're so good at kind of carving out time to take care of everybody else, but it seems really
Yeah.
challenging sometimes to do what we need to do to embrace self-care ourselves. So Melissa and I just thought, let's start something and get some resources going. And over the last probably 3 years or so, we've developed a specific framework that we are really getting some good feedback on, and yeah, just kind of continuing to build some resources related to that.
Awesome. Melissa, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so excuse me, like Karen said, uh, we previously worked together in a publicly funded uh, mental health services, and I am now also currently in private practice, also a clinical psychologist in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And yeah, like Karen said, we were both kind of just at this point new to private practice and realized there was just such a need. Whether I think we're female or male in this profession, we all know that self care is so important, yet we don't really get any training around how to actually truly engage in sustainable and effective self care. And
Hmm.
so I think we all sort of teach what we need to learn. And we figured, well, this would certainly be beneficial to us, probably is going to be beneficial to others as well. And so we just sort of slowly started creating resources, creating a newsletter and community, and then slowly branched out into our own podcast as well, and just really trying to reach more mental health clinicians because this is so important. And of course, little did we know just a few years ago, as we were starting, the pandemic hit as well. And
Yeah.
so every single mental health professional throughout these past few years has gone through so many changes and challenges, right? Some great things have come about, but some other things have been incredibly challenging. So we
Yeah.
we definitely know that this is a topic that is so relevant to so many of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love talking about self-care because it's one of those, I'm not a therapist myself. My wife is the therapist, and that's
Mm.
kind of my story, but you know, um, there's those topics that I can't really relate as much to, like that's why I don't have people on. We're not talking about specific modalities and stuff like that. But when we talk about self-care, I'm like, okay, this is a topic that I understand as a business owner. And just a lot of people talk about that work-life balance and stuff like that. And so, I relate so much to the topic of self-care because there's so much that I know that I can apply to my own life. So I want to dig into, a little bit more about your framework that you've developed around self-care. So can you kind of just introduce that, let us know, what it is, like an overview, and then let's dive into it.
Sure, yeah. So over the years, we've developed a 4Cs model that we think provides people with a really helpful framework for really developing a self-care plan that makes sense for them specifically and their current circumstances, recognizing that we're all different. And also something that we feel digs in at a deeper level to self-care. So often when people talk about self-care, and I think, this is particularly true in terms of how it's marketed towards women, very kind of commodified, superficial things, often things that focus on our appearance, right? Manicures, pedicures, things like that. Not that those can't be enjoyable, absolutely. But we really have found that a lot of the conversations out there about self-care really don't address why it is so hard and don't really offer kind of deeper level self-care. So that's kind of, how we came about to develop our 4Cs model. So our 4Cs model, the first pillar is connection. And that really speaks to the importance of connecting with new information, such as information that helps us understand why exactly it's so hard for us. Connecting with things that are important to us, our values, our personal vulnerabilities and strengths, and also connecting to a helpful, supportive network of like-minded individuals. So that's kind of our connection pillar in a nutshell. Compassion is our second pillar, and we include compassion towards others, but particularly towards ourselves. As clinicians, we're often very good at feeling compassionate towards others, but not so good at feeling compassion towards ourselves.
Right.
We also include gratitude in our compassion pillar. We feel like when we're more compassionate towards ourselves, it opens up more space for us feeling and noticing things that we are grateful for, rather than kind of focusing on these judgments and such. Um, and maybe I'll let Melissa talk about the next two.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Karen. So, as Karen mentioned, our first two pillars of the model are connection and compassion. And then the second, or the third and fourth pillars are courage and creativity. And we actually really especially like talking about these pillars because I think it's not surprising when people hear us talk about connection and compassion. I think already we're starting to divert from the stereotypical notions of self-care with our first two pillars. But with the third and fourth pillars, I think we're really helping to broaden people's minds at this point, because usually courage is not something that is talked about when it comes to self-care, right? Like, why do I need courage, right? Why do I need courage to have a bubble bath or get a massage or, even get 8 hours of sleep? But the reality is, again, as Karen mentioned, a lot of these things are not actually going to bring about the true changes that people are looking for. And more importantly, the things that probably are going to bring about lasting and effective self-care changes for ourselves are going to require some courage,
Yeah.
because they are going to create some discomfort for us, right? And even something like getting 8 hours of sleep a night, that might actually be kind of challenging, right? Depending
Yeah.
on your life circumstances, the phase of life that one is in themselves, work demands, personal demands, right? All of these things. Even getting a decent amount of sleep is certainly not as simple as it sounds. And of course, any clinician who's ever worked with clients with insomnia knows sleep can be very challenging. So, just a really small example of how truly engaging in care for ourselves that is really going to make a difference in feeling like we're living a life that we don't need to escape from, which is really one of the best conceptualizations of self-care that we've ever come across. So we really like to highlight kind of that way of thinking about things, right? This isn't just
Yeah.
about again, those stereotypical or commodified notions. It's really about, again, connecting with our values. What's important to me? What do I maybe need to change in my life to get more of what's important to me in my life? And again, that might be kind of uncomfortable. That might require us to do some things that we're not yet doing. That might require us to set some boundaries that we don't feel totally comfortable setting. That might require us to have some conversations with people that are maybe going to disappoint them. Who knows? Maybe not, but just the fear of that is going to cause some discomfort, right? So there are going to
Yeah.
be so many aspects of truly engaging in self-care that are probably going to be pretty uncomfortable. And so that's why courage is one of our C's as well. And then lastly, creativity. And again, this is not something that usually naturally comes to people's minds, but we really love the inclusion of creativity as well, because this is another aspect that can allow us to better connect with what matters to us. That can really help us even connect to maybe things that we enjoyed at an earlier stage of life, and also really help us to move from just sort of being a passive recipient to inputs, kind of consuming things, which of course in the past few years we've all probably consumed way too much information than we ever
Oh yeah.
did previously. Never mind, consuming, food and drink. And so there can be this really amazing shift that can happen when we can focus instead on producing something, or even just engaging with aspects of our lives in more of a truly hands-on kind of way, instead of simply, again, receiving input. So really producing something. And we find for clinicians in particular, this can be so valuable because so much of our work is intangible, right? It can be incredibly rewarding to help people make these amazing changes in their lives and their functioning and their mental wellness, but it's not the kind of thing that we can like touch or see in the same way
Yeah, right.
as making a widget, right? So that kind of tangible aspect of creativity is so valuable as well.
Yeah. I love it. As I'm listening to you speak, I kind of I want to go back to that courage and creativity. Like you said, like these are something that you don't always talk about when it comes to self-care, but I love it. Like it makes total sense. And what normally happens when I interview folks on the podcast is kind of like I'm listening and I'm always like filtering it through my own experience, obviously, and like, okay, how can I apply this, or how does this show up in my own life? And I love that you include courage, because like you said, it's going to take courage to do some of these things to really take care of yourself, and the way that shows up for me, and also for my wife as a therapist, is blocking like time for self-care, and that's where the courage comes in, because it's like our weeks are so busy. We've got two young boys, so there's school, there's work, we both own our own businesses. And so to be courageous would be, I'm going to see one less client this week because I'm close to burnout, or I could even see courage crossing over creativity is like, I'm going to block out the time so that I can play my guitar, which is behind my desk, right behind me here, but I know I don't really pick it up as much as I would hope to do. So I love like the intersection of those two pieces, that courage and creativity. I think that's really inspiring, and it just kind of it reminds me of the things that I want to get back to that I often let slide because I'm not being intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I think has really resonated for folks that we've started incorporating in our model is talking about kind of the evolutionary perspective and other reasons why this is actually so hard. And that's, that is part of our connection pillars, right? Connecting with new information. And I think it's just so important, because if we understand why this is just naturally going to be hard, we're in such a better position, I think, to tolerate the discomfort that comes
Yeah.
when we're acting kind of against some of those messaging or our hardwired nature. It just makes it easier to lean into that and to not let the discomfort, whether it's guilt, because oftentimes for a lot of folks, right, that's what shows up,
Yeah.
or other discomfort, like doing things that are good for us when we're tired, let's say. And I think that's just become such an important part of our model, and it really draws from acceptance and commitment therapy and how they talk about the evolutionary perspective, and how important it is to understand
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And is that really like the starting point, for someone who's really wanting to do more of that intentional work for, taking care of, and like you said, creating that life you don't want to escape from, which by the way is such I want to put that on my wall. I want that like, printed on my walls. Like, that's such a good, it's so simple, but it's so profound. So is that sort of, understanding how we're wired, or the culture that we're in, all these, things we're coming up against, is that really the starting point for self-care?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why one of the reasons connection ended up being our first pillar, um, because it is so important. I think when we're when we have a better understanding of our own values, and let's face it, like how often do we really sit down and think about what our values are? And the reality is those can shift. You know,
Yeah.
the top 5 values at this stage in my life are probably quite different than, you know, the top 5 20 years ago. So knowing that about yourself, I think provides you with a bit of a compass for which direction you want to go. What do you want to head towards? What do you want more of in your life that is meaningful for you? And then connecting with the factors that pose barrier, just very real barriers for us. I think,
Yeah.
again, absolutely knowing that is just going to put you in such a better position to be prepared to deal with the discomfort and other things that do come up, whether it's the system you're working in kind of maybe not supporting you, or even family and loved ones perhaps not really understanding why certain things are really essential for us to make sure we do have in our schedules.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like, you know, when you're starting out, you're understanding, you're connecting with that new information, like you said. And so you're identifying those places where you're going to hit those maybe roadblocks to self-care, I guess I could call it. And then you got to have that compassion for, you know, for yourself and where you're at. And then we move into that courageous space where, okay, now we're going to set some boundaries. We're going to, like, you know, really, I love, you know, just keep saying, I love like intentional therapists. Like, you're coming back to the intentionality to create that life. So, you know, just your brand is perfectly named. So kudos to you. So you're getting very intentional on those courageous things you need to do or schedule. And then you're also finding ways to be creative to get back to that sort of maybe like childlike play and that sort of thing. I
Mhm.
love it. That's such a great and simple framework to take people through.
And if I can add one piece about the creativity pillar as well,
Yeah.
Daniel, because as I said, it really is about being able to produce something, not simply consume things or information, but it's also really about a willingness to get messy. And this might be a
Mhm.
literal willingness to get messy, right? Like paint and dirt and,
Yeah.
you know, whatever, flour. But it's also, and even more importantly, like a psychological willingness to not be perfect, right? To make
Yeah.
some mistakes, to try something out, to experiment, to see what happens, right? To kind of go into a situation without knowing for sure what the outcome is going to be. And again, we can see that it's like all of the pillars are going to be required now, right? Because we're
Yeah.
going to need courage to be willing to get messy in the first place, right? We're going to need some compassion for if things don't go exactly how we would like them to go, right? And again, we need to be connecting with that information about, yeah, like how our hard wiring is going to try to stop us from even doing something that isn't going to have a
Yeah.
certain outcome associated with it. And especially as mental health professionals who, you know, most people have probably done at least a master's degree for their education. But even if they haven't, you know, even just doing a bachelor's degree in university, that still says something about who we are as people, right? And how we value working hard and, you know, doing well, getting good grades, right? There's probably some elements of perfectionism that show up for many of us. And so that also can be so incredibly difficult because we've been reinforced throughout many years for working hard, not like embarrassing ourselves publicly, all these kinds of
Yeah.
things. And so yeah, again, just even recognizing that that is going to make it tough to branch out and like start a business or, you know, try something new. Even if we're just talking about like a more traditional creative pursuit of like drawing or painting or something like that. Again, that might even just on its own feel really uncomfortable for
Yeah.
us if we're not willing to let go of needing this to go a very particular way. So,
Yeah.
just a quick example of how all of the pillars really also just interact with each other.
Yeah.
And as you said, it really does come back to the intentionality and just being deliberate about why am I doing what I'm doing, and then again having the courage to make changes that are in the service of getting more of what we want, even if that means doing things that are different from what other people around us are doing. even if it means doing some things that are going to feel uncomfortable, maybe even feel unconventional, but knowing that the reasons why we're doing these things.
Yeah. Yeah, I would really relate with that creativity piece and what you said about like the willingness to get messy. Like even in the literal sense, that's something I struggle with. I'm like I'm the neat one, and with two little boys, that's often like, okay, let it go, let it go. They're learning, like they're like you said, they are, they're less afraid to get dirty. It just naturally happens, and they're stepping into that. So like, how can I embrace that and just let go? And it's often when we let go where the fun really happens. And another thing too that I want to mention, like on creativity, and where my mind kind of goes too, is that I know that when I probably don't have these pillars activated and intentional in my life, I'm often less creative. That's often when I find myself in that place of maybe stress, close to burnout, or yeah, or just like in a fearful place too. Like I find myself, okay, I'm not creating, I'm not dreaming, I'm not coming up with new ideas for my business, or ways to creative ways to maybe solve a problem in my business or something like that. And then that's sort of, for me, like just kind of knowing my own sort of personality is my reminder to get back to, okay, what's out of whack, what's out of balance here with my self-care. Because when I am in that place where I'm not afraid and I'm ready to get messy, that's when I get creative. And that's when it's like, oh, maybe we should do this with this one client, or maybe we need to create, this content. That would be a great creative resource, for our audience, stuff like that. So that's one place that my mind goes.
I think that's such an excellent point, Daniel. I mean, I certainly noticed that myself, right? Because I think we need to have room in our day to pause and reflect. And
Yeah.
I
And
know
that's
when
hard.
it is, right? Because we're so used to this fast-paced
Yeah.
life. And I'm certainly can relate to what you're mentioning, Daniel. When I'm rushing around, I don't have enough space for me in my schedule. That
Yeah.
is when I just seem to lose any ability to be creative, because I mean, being creative does take us, it means us taking time and making space to actually just think about things and reflect. And if
Yeah.
we don't have that, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things that I think the evolutionary perspective does a really good job about, in terms of explaining, like, why do we stay so busy and why is it so hard for us to carve time out for ourselves in our schedule. And they talk about kind of pre-modern time and how the survival part of our brain is still very, very similar to what it was back then, and it can create challenges for us. So the survival part of our brain, in pre-modern times, right, being associated with a tribe was really essential to our survival. We were more likely to survive attacks from other tribes, from animals. We were more likely to find food as a group. We were more able to secure shelter as a group. So staying connected with a tribe was so important.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you did that was a couple of things. You put their needs ahead of your own, and you worked really hard to prove your value. And so, right, so when we take time away for ourselves and we're not tending to others' needs, that guilt can show up.
Yeah.
Or we feel so driven to prove our value and our worth to our tribes, and that might be our employers, our family, our children. And it makes it difficult for us to take some space in our schedule that's really just
Mm-hmm.
for us, even though in the
Yeah.
long run, we're probably going to show up as a better parent, a better partner, a better worker, whatever we're doing, if we do take that space. But it's hard. It,
Yeah.
it feels counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And
That's the word that came into my mind. Counterintuitive for sure. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And the evolutionary perspective also talks a little bit about how we're wired to add things. And in Yael Schonberg's book, um, Work, Parent, Thrive, she talks about this, and how in again pre-modern times, stress was associated with scarcity, right? So not enough
Mm.
food,
Yeah.
or shelter's an issue, things like that. And so we're naturally wired to add things in. And so even when it's not effective, we're more likely to add things rather than subtract in our
Yeah.
lives, when subtraction is often what we really need and what's going to maybe be much more effective in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. This shows up a lot in parenting for me. It's
Mhm,
like
mhm.
you're always adding things, and you kind of I do feel like, so I'm kind of in, like, this season right now we've got a 6-year-old and a about to be 2-year-old, and so the
Mhm.
6-year-old, he gets out of school at 2, the 2-year-old, he gets out at 1. So my morning is I'm wrapping up, eat lunch, go get the youngest one,
Mhm.
have him for about an hour, go get the oldest one, get him back, nap time, like all that stuff. And it's like you said, it's counterintuitive, because I'm like, well, where's my time to be creative? Where's my time to block that out? And it's a challenge, and you got to get creative to kind of find those blocks of time. But yeah, that's kind of when I get on sort of the hamster wheel of, you just keep going, without taking the time to be intentional, and um yeah, get back to that creative space, get back to that courageous space, and just identify like what changes need to be made.
Absolutely. And I completely feel you, Daniel. I also have a 6-year-old son. And so, but without the
Yeah.
2-year-old in addition. And I think again, this is where compassion is so incredibly important, because it's a tough phase of life.
Yeah.
And right, there's challenges with any age group for sure. But I think it's so easy to forget the reality, even when we're right in it. I think it, again, counterintuitively, can be easy to forget that there's this is just a common struggle of
Right.
Mhm.
being a parent,
Yeah.
right? And that it's not, again, a personal failing on our part. It's the nature of the beast,
Yeah.
and being able to connect with that compassion for ourselves, and recognizing that this is what parents everywhere since the dawn of time have experienced. And
Yeah.
again, back to connecting with that information, and again, connecting with our values, connecting with that compassion, and like you were saying, having that courage then too, to also be intentional about, let me set aside even just 20 minutes to think about how I can structure my day so that there is a little bit more space for me in there. And
Hmm.
again, the reality is, when kids are little, there probably is going to be less space for us, at least in the ways that maybe we would want there to be, or the way we've
Right.
been used to it before kids came in the
Yeah.
picture. But I think it's also a fallacy to think that there can't be any time for ourselves, right? That there can't be
Yeah.
any opportunities to be creating more of that life that we don't need to escape from. And of course, granted, throughout the hardest days of the pandemic, that was very, very challenging.
Yeah.
And at the same time, still opportunities to, at the very least, be intentional, to connect with our values, to connect with that compassion, and absolutely courage and creativity to even just make little shifts, so that things can start to be a little bit more the way we would like them to be.
Yeah.
Mhm.
This is great. I feel like I just got like some free therapy and a whole like set of tools that I can use now, when I start to feel, these that guilt or that struggle or that stress, to take a step back, connect with the information. I love what you said, like everyone, this is a struggle for everyone. It's not just me.
Mhm.
And then, moving to that place of compassion for where we're at in our situation, and then getting courageous and creative with, ways to create that life that I don't want to escape from. I love it. It's been great. Are there any other things that you want to, mention on this topic before we kind of wrap things up, things that you want to leave people with?
I think we just certainly, if folks are interested in learning a little more about our 4C model and interested in our podcast, to please visit us on our website at intentionaltherapist.ca.
Yeah, absolutely. And Melissa and Karen have great resources there. So definitely check that out. And we'll put that in the show notes. But it was so great chatting with you and just learning a little bit more about what you do, Melissa and Karen. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, our pleasure. Thanks for having us, Daniel.
Yeah, it was a wonderful conversation. Thank you.